Well, hello everyone, it's me again. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here, so you're stuck with my big face on the screen again. So this time, I want to talk about our Why series. In this mini series, I'm exploring some of the questions that beginners often ask themselves. I'm still new to photography. I started about a year and a half ago, and throughout my learning, there's many why question. Why do this? Why do that? That came along. So I hope that to be able to share some of the answers that I found with you, and that will be helpful for some of you. Last time I talked about why you should consider shooting manual instead of using all the automatic function on your camera. And this time I want to dive into why you should consider shooting RAW instead of JPEG. But just like anything, there's no definite rule in photography. Some professionals do shoot JPEG, so the goal is not to convince you that you must shoot RAW, but instead to maybe give you some reasons why you would want to explore or learn or start shooting RAW. Okay, so let's start with some common answers to the question why shoot RAW. So you often hear things like it has much more data than JPEG. You'll be able to make much better picture or images. I shoot everything RAW, so you should too. These are all kind of accurate answers, I guess, but they don't mean anything to a beginner. So the first thing you must know when you're a beginner is that the power of RAW lies within what you cannot see. So that's kind of an odd statement. We do photography for what photography is all about, what you see, but RAW files have a lot more data than what can be seen. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that later. But I think that's one of the main reasons why it's can be kind of hard for a beginner to understand why they should shoot RAW, because it's something that you can't really see. So let's see if we can shine some light on that. We'll start with just a little analogy and explaining what RAW and JPEG is. Just quickly, I'll try not to be technical, like I said. So without being too technical, in a few words, RAW files are the exact information that your camera captures when you press a shutter. Whatever light information the camera gets, that's the RAW data. At this point, in fact, it's not even an image yet. It's just data. And later on, software like Lightroom and your camera convert that data into a JPEG, which is an image or another file type, or puts it to the screen, but there's some conversion from that data that is needed. And JPEG is a file format, an image format that contains a bunch of pixel information and of an image. So it's just a bunch of varying dots of different colors that creates an image. So if we do an analogy like you're seeing right on the screen right now, the RAW file would be kind of like a film negative. It's what the camera captured. It's exactly how it was at the time you pressed the shutter. It is not quite an image yet, but it's all the information you need to create an image. While JPEGs are kind of like your printed photos. They're the pictures, you see the pictures, and this is what you have. We'll talk about that a little later, but you can't really manipulate that to as much as the RAW files. let's see. So just further explain things, let's just go through what the camera does when you shoot JPEG. So you press the shutter, your camera captures all that light information on its sensor, and that's what's called the raw data. If you save into your raw file, that's pretty much where it ends. But then with JPEG, the camera processes that information. It applies a whole bunch of adjustment, the white balance. A color profile decides how to deal with that information color-wise. You've got black and white in color, you've got vivid and stuff like that. And then it also does some adjustment to contrast, sharpening, noise reduction, and all kind of lot of stuff to make your images look good. And then it saves that processed image in a JPEG and deletes all the raw data. Alright, so let's jump right to our first reason. First why, recover shadows. This is a really wide technical thing. I said I wouldn't talk too technical, so I'm gonna try to explain this in the easiest way as I can. All you really need to know is that in the I'll get out of full screen here so you can see my arrow here. All you really need to know is that this is real life. The first bar up top, that's real life. There's a lot of color, from pure black to pure white, more than 50 shades. And then our eyes cannot see all that range at this, at the same time. Cannot see that whole range, and your camera can see less than your eyes. And when you come to JPEG, your computer screen, and even prints, you have even less range than your camera. And when I say camera, since raw file is exactly what your camera sees, this is what the raw file is. So it's better than JPEG. It has a much bigger range of tone, from black to whites and colors, than JPEG, less than our eyes, and a lot less than the real world. What you need to understand also is that, not everything you photograph is going to be this wide. If you photograph under a overcast day, you might have a range, that's like this. It's less than your camera can our eyes, and even sometimes a lot less than your camera can capture, and then you're good. Your camera captures the whole thing. Sometimes not. And even though, there's all these shades, our eyes, adjust to the darkness at night and to the brightness during the day. So this is not fixed either. Same thing with your camera. When you adjust the exposure, that's basically what you're doing. You're just moving that range from left to right, trying to get more light, more shadows. So I think that's about what you really need to know about dynamic range. This is really not technical. This is not up to scale. There's numbers, technical numbers that goes with everything there, but I'm gonna skip that altogether because I don't even know them myself. All right, so let's just go look at an example of recovering shadows. So yeah, first thing, I'm not using Lightroom, that's just me. On the left you've got a JPEG file, and on the right you've got a RAW file. That's how they came out of the camera. They look pretty similar right now. You can see maybe the RAW file a little brighter, but they're close. So when we talk about how much recovering shadows and how much data there's in JPEGs and RAW, so let's just take the shadows, just the shadows, and see what we can get from that JPEG file. So if we raise the shadows, you see it gets pretty bright. We can recover a lot of data there, but you see the dark areas that were dark at the beginning. They stayed dark levels. And last meeting, somebody asked about clipping. So clipping is clipping. Clipping is when your file or your image has pure white or pure black. So there's no information beyond pure white or pure black. So if we raise this, you'll see it do remove a little bit, but still whatever is clipped stays clipped, because the JPEG has only that information. It doesn't have any more information than what you have. It's like a print, you can't, it's what you see is what you have. So it can brightens the pixels and brightens the color, but it cannot go and get more information than what it has. So let's just remove this and just see our raw file. So this is the raw file. Let's see. First, you see how when you load the raw file, it just comes flatter. That's because, it doesn't add all the, like I said, the adjustments that the camera does, the brightness, the contrast, and all that the camera adds to make your images pop. It just removes that. So you get maybe a flatter files, but let's see how we can recover shadows. Now here you see, you see all the details in all the blacks. Look at this coat here. You see all the details in there. So even if you go and, there's no clipping. So here, it doesn't even go to pure black. It has a much more wider range. So let's just put them back together. Remove this clipping thing and go back to where we were, and you see the difference. So this is what you can do with the JPEG, and this is how you can recover the shadows with a raw file. So this is kind of huge. Now for why number 2, changing your mind. You remember the film negative analogy? So you don't print a negative, right? You just create a print from a negative. So every time you create a print from a negative, the negative stays intact itself. It doesn't change. The same goes with RAW. You use the RAW, when you apply adjustments and all that, they're only directives that the software does when it converts from RAW to JPEG. They're directives. Every time you do adjustments in Lightroom, it doesn't save, overwrite anything that's in the raw file. The raw file is never touched, just like a negative. So, but as we've kind of seen in the shadow example, the information that you have in a JPEG is what you have is what you get. You cannot, it's a bunch of color and shades. If you got dark shades, you have to work with dark shades. Software are really good to adjust all these pixels, but they do have to work with those pixels. They cannot create something that's not there. So the best example is black and white. So let's look at 2 images. On the left, you've got JPEG. On the right, you've got the raw file. If I go in and try to edit the JPEG file, you'll see that it's black and white. No matter if I try to, you see it just tries to, I can add color, but it just adds a shade. It doesn't, like the Montreal Canadian logo, it's not gonna come blue, red, and white. It's just a shade of color. So you cannot create colors. It's not gonna put that coat pink. You can adjust a lot of stuff, but nothing that'll recreate the colors. Like I said, it may change the shades, but it's not gonna create anything new. But if we go to the raw file, you'll see that it's you've got all the profiles are still there. Here in on RAW, black and white is in effect, so I can just go in here, remove that effect, and there you go. We got all the colors back. You can change everything back. So you can change your mind after the fact. If you shot black and white, you've got, even if you did that in camera, you come here in RAW and you always will have the color data. Even if you, whatever settings you put in your camera, you'll have the full information in the RAW file no matter what. Now to why number 3, white balance. This is pretty much exactly the same concept as we've already talked. I'm doing overbull on time, so I'm going to try to be a little faster here. So it's exactly the same concept. If you go in camera, you get your white balance wrong, which happens often. In RAW, it doesn't matter. You can adjust however you want after the fact. But JPEG, we've seen in the black and white, it just tries to mimic the change of white balance, but it has to play with the colors that are there. So it's not going to be as accurate. It's going to be an okay job, but it's really not going to be as accurate. So if you shoot JPEG, be a lot careful about your white balance, as you cannot recover as well. RAW, well, you be careful, but you can always come back after. Why number 4, revisit images. Technology changes all the time. You keep your images in RAW, so you give yourself the opportunity to revisit your images in the future using different technology. Technologies grow so fast. Maybe in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, there's going to be a software that's going to be super amazing at removing noise. So if you've got a really meaningful image that has a lot of noise, and right now you can't do much with it, maybe in a few years we'll be able to really edit that image and bring it to a good quality image. So it's and I do that. When I started, as you've seen, I'm not using Lightroom. When I started using On1 Photo RAW, I did go back in time and re-edit some of the past, my pictures of the past, and see what I could do with On1 that are a little different than Lightroom. It's just fun to be able to rework some images sometimes. So that's something to keep in mind, and some of the reason you might want to use RAW. And finally, the why number 5, it just keeps doors open for creative post-processing. By that I mean, RAW really gives all the control to photographers. You've seen earlier when you open a RAW file, it's kind of flat, there's nothing there, but it really gives the photographer control over how you really want to show that image. Do you want a lot of contrast? Do you want your colors saturated or not? And there's a whole lot you can do to your images. There's stuff that your camera does, but they do it, the same with every shot that you take. But when you come to know how to do these things, you can really recreate your scenes the way you saw them. Sometimes the camera really don't get quite the color from the sky or something like that. When you yourself process your RAW files, you can really put the emphasis where you want it and where it matters to you. Alright, so just an overview, RAW and JPEG. So RAW, the positive things about RAW, it has more details and information. We've talked about that over and over. It gives more options in post-processing. You can adjust your white balance at any time. It always keeps the color information, even if you shoot black and white. It's always non-destructive. There's no software out there that changes anything to the data. Remember, it's a digital negative. It doesn't change. On the negative side, they're large files and they do need processing. We've seen they're kind of flat when you open them. And if you just export them like that, you know, you're not going to get the greatest images. But, you know, that's one of the costs, you know, to putting your own signature on your own images. As far as JPEG, they're a smaller file. You know, post-processing is not necessary. You can do it, of course, but it's not necessary. Most of the time, your images are going to come out really well. Well, that's the third point. Out-of-camera images look better out of camera. The downside, you do lose data. You know, we've seen in the shadows. Once it's, once it's black, you can't go back. But I had to say it, I guess. But you got what you got. You just, whatever colors you have, whatever, if you have black and white, if you have vivid colors, you know, that's what you have. That's what your software will have to work with. Even though software are really smart to play with colors, they can't do everything. They can't invent colors where there's none. As RAW, like we said, there's a lot of data and things that we do not see. Third negative, you can't recover shadows or white balance very well. And whatever you shoot, your decisions that you make at shooting time are final, like black and white, your color profiles, your white balance. You know, they're embedded in the file and they're final. So yeah, just remember, JPEGs are also fine. You know, if it's fine to shoot JPEG. If you don't like post-processing, shoot JPEG. If you depends, I shoot JPEG when I shoot basketball because there's so many files, so many pictures. I've just come to know exactly what the setting I need, and you know, I get exactly the results I want through JPEG, so I don't need to process them afterwards. Sometimes it'd be fun, but for what it is, I mean, it's good enough. And remember, the power of RAW lies within what you cannot see. So yeah, maybe this might seem abstract at first, but once you start to know what you can do with RAW, you'll see really where it shines. So with that, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. No matter what you choose, JPEG or RAW, just keep shooting. So thank you, everyone.